Things are filling up on the bookshelf behind you as we progress.
Bit by bit, we're getting it back.
It's looking pretty good back there in the Johnston household. So,
yeah,
a lot of things happening, and Trump stories just keep coming and coming and coming and coming. Meanwhile, Nikki Haley is rising in the polls, and I kind of don't know whether to bring this up or not, because I know you've told me before you don't put a lot of stock in polls, especially at this point. But when she's rising in the polls, and when it's now become that the Trump campaign is focusing its money to spend on attack ads against her specifically, does it become something of note that we should pay attention to? Because
I think at this stage we need to pay attention. We're seeing people withdraw from races.
Yeah.
And in Nevada, we're about to have a schizophrenic primary among the Republicans.
Oh.
There's an election which voting starts, I think, Friday or Saturday, for military and people out of the country, and continues through early June. And Nikki Haley will win the Nevada Republican primary because she's the only one on the ballot who is a recognizable name.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a caucus. Donald is in the caucus because the Republicans said you can be in the primary or you can be in the caucus. You can't do both.
What's the difference as far as who is the nominee from your state?
Well, that's not entirely clear at this moment.
What?
But I think that the caucus will turn out to be more important. But, this is part of the, we already have a severely dysfunctional government because the idea of, negotiating and compromise is just been destroyed in Washington. Back in up until, about 1984, maybe 1990, Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate would rent houses or very big apartments, and they would live together. They would drink together. They play cards. They do other things men away from home for long periods of time are known to do. And now the last time I checked, there were no Republicans and Democrats sharing housing. And somebody said, bipartisanship these days is a Democrat and a Republican sharing a cab.
Wow.
And so as that has taken hold, we have these efforts in both parties to control who becomes the nominee. Hillary's crowd in 2016 tried very hard to eliminate Bernie, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this case, where we have a primary, Haley will win, and a caucus, Trump will win. And my authority on this is an excellent journalist I've known for, 45 years, John Ralston, who runs the Nevada Independent. We'll have a bit of a mess there. But Haley is starting to get money from wealthy donors who don't like Trump.
Yep.
And believe he will be bad for their business interests. So I think we do need to pay some attention to her, and we need to be thinking about what happens if, and I was the first person to say this on national TV, Donald has been prepping his followers both to vote for him and to not vote if he knows he's going to get absolutely creamed. He can say, it's all rigged, stay home, don't participate, the deep state.
Yeah.
If he does that, then Nikki Haley is likely to be the Republican nominee. The racists will have a very hard time with that because she's, born in the U.S., her parents are from India. And, this will turn out to be, I think, rather interesting as we go along here, and whether Trump is able to stay in the campaign. And his delay tactics mean that he is going to be sitting in a criminal courtroom during the daytime, much of the campaign, and he has no one to blame for that except Donald J. Trump.
So the CBS YouGov poll, the numbers are 44% of likely voters in the GOP primary in, I believe, New Hampshire. So this is specific to New Hampshire. are going for Trump. That's 44%. 29% Haley. So she's the second top vote getter there. 11% DeSantis, 10% Christie, 5% Ramaswamy. The rest are negligible.
Right.
But if we see a DeSantis drop out, there's 11% likely going to Haley, mostly to Haley, I would imagine. 10% Christie, probably going to Haley, right? So she then can rise and rise. And the question is, I guess, do Democrats want an adversary in Trump because maybe with all the baggage he carries, he's easier to beat? Or do they want an adversary in Haley because no matter what, she then moves on to the next step, and it's safer for America to have her in that spot running for president than Trump?
Well, you always want to run against the weakest person you can.
Right.
In California, where you are, and I spent almost 40 years of my life as a native, there was a tradition of registering in the other party to make sure that the weakest candidate won the primary so that you could vote against that person in the general election. In California, it was easy to change parties. Here in New York, where I've lived for the last 30 years, it's very hard to change parties.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it takes a long time. So clearly the Biden campaign would want to run against Nikki Haley, not against Donald Trump. Biden is clearly supremely confident about what he's doing, but I think he's making a major mistake. And I tweeted about this and threaded about it and Facebooked about it in the last day. The Democrats have never been good at marketing. The Republicans are masterful at ideological marketing. And the Biden comms people, communications people, they are all in a protective mode. I called the White House and then was asked to put it in writing to deal with his current press secretary and her deputy. And I got essentially, we don't like that question, go pound sand response on something that actually I realized later should be good for them if they answered the questions, but they won't. And they're all in protective and reactive mode instead of being in selling mode, instead of taking the agenda and running with it and saying, look at this project we've done. They're doing a little bit of that, but not in any serious way. I mean, the price of gasoline has fallen more than $1 since last summer. People don't know that. I can tell you by my monitoring of internet traffic that millions of people don't know that.
How do they not know it? We see it every day at the pump.
Because people are deny that. One of the most fundamental things that happens in humans is we are fundamentally herd animals. We follow leaders. And we're not quite cows, but we are herd animals who tend to follow a leader. So Ronald Reagan comes onto the scene, is seen as a leader and changes the whole direction of the country. And Donald Trump is perceived by many people to be a leader. And Biden, who is an incredibly competent person who knows how to work Washington, who has figured out, despite the Supreme Court limiting him, how to provide student loan relief to many, many people, not everybody, because the Supreme Court shot him down, and has gotten legislation passed with the same margin in the House that the Republicans have now, that is transforming the country's economy. He's not out there selling that. They are being reactive, and they're pointing to this little thing there and that little thing there. Somebody posted yesterday a picture on the internet of a project funded by Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. It's in a blue state where it isn't going to change anything.
No.
Those signs need to be going up in states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, because Trump only has to win about 7 battleground states, and he will be back in the White House. He could lose by 10, 20 million votes, and because of the Electoral College, get back into the White House. And I think it's time for Joe Biden to get a new comms team. And the fact is there are a bunch of alienated Republicans who left the Republican Party who know how to do this. And he needs to have a positive message, not a reactive message. He's been pretty good personally about not reacting much to Trump and the people around him, but he really needs to get out there and emphasize what's happening. And the two issues that a lot of people feel are gasoline prices, which have come down, even though a lot of people are in denial with that, and food prices. And many food prices have come down. Overall grocery prices. And the U.S. government spends a lot of money sending out people who are like shoppers. They go out and check prices. They go down lines in supermarkets and look at this item and that item. Food prices overall are up 2% from a year ago. Mm-hmm. Going forward, we're going to see inflation now at 3.1%, dipping down into the twos. 3% inflation is essentially the average since 1947.
Yeah.
And, but they need to sell in a positive way this message. And sadly, the Democrats have just never been good at this. I have written about, how awful the Democrats are at messaging. I've talked to some of them face to face. I've also talked to Republicans about how good the party is at this. And what I detect in the Democrats is a sort of belief. Nancy, I know, certainly I got this vibe from Nancy Pelosi. Mm-hmm. Well, we're doing good works and people will recognize that. No. You have to go sell the good works you're doing. You can't just assume we're doing the right thing and people will think it's the right thing.
Well, it also kind of assumes that people are paying attention. And honestly, if you talk to most people, they're not even paying attention to the news most days.
Right. Well, one of the big differences in the world, when I was a reporter in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and wrote a story about, some kind of misconduct by a politician, things happened. People got fired. Voters turned people out of office. Now, as a reviewer of one of my books said, the public gets told stuff, but they don't react. They don't care. We have developed in this country a broad sense across the spectrum of powerlessness.
Yeah.
You can't fight City Hall. You can't win. People in my ex-Twitter thread were saying there's nothing that Biden can do because the news media isn't doing its job. No, it's your job to put the news out there. Most of the news isn't what I did for a living and do for a living. Mm-hmm. It is accurately reciting what sources say. And if you're not selling your message, then the other side gets quoted and you are in the defensive.
That's right. Because we kind of brought up the media, I want this right before we came on the air. I saw this story pop up and I wasn't going to bring it up to you, but now I'm gonna. There's a story today that says Fox News tops MSNBC and CNN as the most trusted news source in this new poll, that more voters are relying on social media for news than any cable news network ahead of 2024. This is a New York Times Siena College poll that was done that says no major media company is universally winning over voters. Participants were asked which news source they turn to most often. Most are scrolling through social media and maybe popping on cable news. According to the results, 13% cited Fox News as their most consumed news source. CNN follows at 10%, MSNBC at just 3%. 15% cite social media as their source for news.
In the last hour, Kim, I put up at both Threads and ex-Twitter a story from the Bulwark. That's the conservative Republican anti-Trumpers, about how Fox News or Fox Business News was saying that the Ford F-150 electric trucks are so unwanted that the host was offered one or was told by the dealer he could buy one for $10,000.
What?
Right. I mean, your reaction, anybody who knows anything knows that has to be a lie, but he doubled down and kept insisting. He told Pete Buttigieg he'd give him the phone number of the dealer, and apparently hasn't followed through.
Of course.
So, Fox News lies all the time. The people, thank you for those who are watching for putting that up on the screen. The people who watch Fox or MSNBC or somewhere else are going to tell you that's the source they trust. Otherwise, that would be a sign of some kind of mental illness. Well, basically I only watch what I don't believe. Asking people about who you trust, well, useful socially, what it really tells you is what do you watch? Yeah. When I was at the Philadelphia Inquirer, which was a very aggressive, honest, paper run by people with strong backbones. They won 17 Pulitzers in 18 years, and they really earned about 35 during that period. They were absolutely fearless, and they hired consultants, or the corporate headquarters hired consultants, and we had to go to a meeting. What do people want to see in their newspaper? And I just broke up the meeting by saying, excuse me, I don't know anything about fashion. If you ask me, what do I want to see in fashion? I can tell you longer skirts, or shorter skirts. And that's sort of the end of my knowledge. I probably, like most men, will tend to favor shorter skirts. But because it's our business to tell you what we think is important. That is the one judgment that we are absolutely entitled to. Here's what we think is important.
Mm-hmm.
And MSNBC is rigorous about fact-checking, correcting the record, inviting people on, and if they won't come on, finding proxies for those people. Fox hasn't had me on for 15 years because I corrected their host too many times by saying, gee, if that were true, I'd be upset, Lou Dobbs. But that's not what happened. Here are the facts.
Why would they want you on? They can't get away with the lies. No.
Yeah. So I got,
finally someone to call them on their baloney. No.
The segment I was on about 15 years ago, and Bill Salmon just stopped it cold in the middle. And the cameraman said, I don't think you're ever going to be on Fox again.
Hallelujah.
And at CNN, similarly, there is a serious effort to cover the news. That doesn't mean things are perfect. When you get to a war like what's going on in the Middle East right now, the first casualty of war is truth. Everybody's lying to promote their position, and you try to do the best you can. And yes, I've seen a fair amount of journalists getting snookered, particularly in this war. But to trust Fox, where it's so well documented that they just make stuff up. There have been scholarly studies. There have been studies by Angelo Cursone's group, Media Matters, and by others, just showing that they make stuff up. Where they paid the $787 million in damages.
Right. I was going to say, it's public that they with the voting machine scandal that they lied, and all the emails that came out. It's public that they lie.
So I think all that poll does is tell you a lot of people watch Fox. The people who watch Fox, by the way, are more likely my age than yours, Kim.
Yeah.
For those who aren't watching and just listening, I have lots of gray hair and almost no black left. I've never seen a gray hair on Kim's head.
Oh, they're there. I'm sure they're there. Okay, let's move on to Trump, which I can't not do because he is likely, he is at this time, running in the GOP presidential primary, but I hate to mention him because I feel like the more it comes out of the mouth, the Trump name comes out of the mouth, the more attention he gets, and I'm just playing right into this carnival wheel. But I want to say that he is trying to get his elections interference case in Georgia dismissed because he says it is against his First Amendment right to free speech. I find it to be asinine, and I needed to present that to you to see what your opinion on the matter was.
So as a matter of law, Trump will not get anywhere with this argument. Similarly, in his Washington, D.C. case, where he contends he has presidential immunity, even this Supreme Court, he's not going to get anywhere. It's possible that the very corrupt Clarence Thomas will vote for Trump if he doesn't recuse himself, which he should. That is, recuse meaning remove himself from the case, because his wife is an active partisan in these matters.
And there's calls for recusal, but so far nothing.
He should be. I think the man should be impeached and removed from office, but there aren't the votes to do it. That's a political action, not a criminal action. He might or might not get Alito's vote, but he will not, under any circumstances, get the three liberals on the court. He's not going to get John Glover Roberts, who wrote the opinion when Trump said, you can't subpoena me in New York. And the opinion starts right off saying everybody has to respect the law and do what the courts tell them to do. Trump's argument is that you can't restrict his free speech. Well, I'm sorry, he is a criminal defendant out on bail. And that's not the same as you and me. He is allowed out on bail, subject to various things. He can be remanded. And any other criminal defendant in the United States, given what Trump has done to intimidate witnesses, to threaten people, and what's happened with the threats against people, would be behind bars. Mob bosses don't do this. If a mob boss wants to give a witness, the witness may disappear, but they don't go out in steps of the courthouse and say, "Will someone rid me of this witness?" Which is effectively what Trump has done. And his efforts to delay are simply going to mean that instead of his trial in Washington, D.C. for trying to overthrow the government starting March 4th, it may start, April 4th. It's going to last 3 months. That's his problem. He created this problem. He could have demanded to go to trial. When the initial indictment was filed, under the rules, he could have demanded a trial in 70 days. Mm-hmm. And he would be done with his trial by now. And either he would be acquitted and he says, "I did nothing wrong, there's no case."
Right.
Or he would be awaiting sentencing, if not already in custody. Right. Now, why is he delayed? Because he knows he's going to be convicted, because he knows he's guilty as sin.
Yeah.
So I think we actually do need to talk about Donald, and we need to talk about the fact that this man has no respect for our Constitution. He has no respect for the rule of law, and that all he's doing is promoting the politics of retribution for him. And people who are angry in this country, partly because of economics, but it's not Biden economics, it's 50 years of economics against working people that are now shifting in the other direction. And people who hate the civil rights movement. They don't want to sit next to a Latino on the airplane. They don't want to have a black woman in the pilot's seat. And those kinds of people, you're never going to change them. They're cooked. They're racists. They're a significant minority of the population. Yeah. And, we have to live with them.
Let's talk about something we talked about yesterday on the show, which is Trump's language. He said recently, over the weekend, that immigrants are poisoning the blood of the United States. He also referred to the word vermin, talked about vermin. These are words that are compared to Adolf Hitler, Nazi Germany, the worst time in modern history. And this is what he pulls. There is an analysis on CNN, in their political section today, and the headline reads, "Trump is putting every racial, ethnic, and religious minority at risk at a time of angry political polarization."
Yeah.
You just mentioned moments ago, these people are cooked that are racist. These are his people. These are his backers. But the rest of us who wonder, who can't really wrap their mind around what happened in the rise up to World War II and the, how people could have gone along with Adolf Hitler. How could people do this? Is there a comparison? Is it a fair comparison to be made that he's pulling the same language and he's kind of trying to go along the same lines?
Kim, I want to answer that, but I just want to start off with, I think we would do well as a society to try and move away from anger towards humor. Yeah. I coached a lot of things at X Twitter and Threads that I say political humor or political art to try and get you to smile. Yeah. And recalling those ads that used to run, where 4 out of 5 doctors recommend Chesterfield cigarettes.
Right.
4 out of 5 Trump children say their mother is an immigrant.
That's true. It's true.
When Donald doesn't want immigrants, he doesn't mean people who are white from Europe. He means people who are from Asia and Africa and Latin America.
Yeah.
So that said, Trump is exactly following the playbook of dictators who destroy democracies. Sarah Kendzior, Kendzior, who was a journalist and then got a doctoral degree in autocratic studies, has written brilliantly about this. She has a wonderful book. It's very readable. What Trump is doing is dehumanizing people who are what sociologists call the other, capital T, capital O, the other. And this is a real test of who we are as a people. Are we, in fact, a racist country where people who want to bring back slavery, and I've literally had people call my home and tell me, what we need to do is make these people slaves again. That's all they're fit for. Is that who we are? Or are we people who want liberty and freedom and justice and to get along and recognize that there's this wonderful, vast variety of human beings who, if we ennoble them, have produced so many wonderful things: art, culture, science, engineering. And so this is a real test of who are we? And the key to that test is going to turn out to be how well we do at getting people to the polls. The Trump people are working very hard to both get people to the polls and block people they don't want to get to the polls. And it doesn't matter particularly how you're going to vote in California where you are, or New York where I am, but in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Wisconsin, those states, it matters a great deal. And yes, Trump has made it very clear what I've said more than 8 years ago. Donald Trump wants to be dictator. And he's now said, I'm going to be dictator, but only for a day. You've ever heard of a dictator who gave up being a dictator other than by death or revolution overthrowing him? Doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. Donald gets in the White House. That's exactly what's going to happen. And Kim, I predict to you that one of the things a Trump administration will set out to do very early on is to repeal the Freedom of Information Act. The government will decide what information we're going to give you. We've already seen this happening in Florida, where the state attorney general says that what books are in libraries is the state's free speech, not yours. I mean, that's Orwellian. So
what you said was so powerful, and I'm disillusioned by just getting people to the polls, because I read a story saying that China, Russia, Iran, and Cuba all tried to meddle in the 2022 congressional elections. That from a new assessment of intelligence.
And by the way, in that election, they failed. They were successful to some degree in 16 and perhaps 18. I don't know about 18, but in 16 and 20, they had some success. In 2022, there were enough things put in the way that they were not at all successful.
I feel like, though, it's about more. I mean, it is about getting people to the polls. I'm not going to disagree with you, but there's other things at play here, and people trying to work against us, countries trying to work against us. And it feels frightening to me that we could then, because of more people pay attention to social media, and we know that these countries are getting on social media, attacking us on social media and trying to influence our elections based on that we really have a fight on our hands, of an informational fight.
Right. Well, we have not figured out as a society how to deal with your rights of free expression and digital media, where people who are agents of the Russian government, they're like the 24 Russian officers who we've indicted. We'll unlikely ever capture or try any of them, but we've indicted them, and how they are interfering, and how to address this. And we're not even seriously talking about that, by the way. And one of the first steps we need to take in that direction is we need to work on seriously talking among ourselves and stopping this business of teaching lies in our history. And if you don't think we teach lies in the schools, there's a wonderful book called Lies My Teacher Told Me by an education theorist who got every single textbook he could lay his hands on, hundreds and hundreds of them, and went through them and just showed, lie after lie after lie that we teach. And then, of course,
to this day, my husband will circle it and provide factual evidence that it's not true and send it back to the classroom. Like, that's not right.
Yeah. And the same thing with sins of omission. Yeah. We just saw one of the right-wing sites saying, having one of the congressmen on saying that, well, it's white people who made America. Really? Let's see. The first person who died for this country was a Muslim. All sorts of inventions, the math that got us into space were done by black people. The wealth, much of the wealth of this country came from slave labor. And I mean, it's just, that's absurd. And we don't tell an honest history. You go to England, one of the things you find out is they're quite honest about their history. They tell, when school children are told the reason that King Henry's wives lost their heads was the king wanted to sleep with somebody else, and he couldn't do it as a marriage without finding an excuse, you're treasonous, to kill his wives. We don't tell truth like that in America.
No.
You know, we sugarcoat things, and it's a very strange society that says children can't be exposed to things, even teenagers, because it will upset them. But by God, we're going to hold training sessions for active shooters
Right.
coming into the classroom.
Yes.
Anyway, we have a lot of work to do to educate ourselves and advance ourselves. But in the short run, what we have to do is, in those key states, get people registered to vote, make sure they stay on the rolls, show up at the polls. And I hope a whole lot of lawyers volunteer, because we're likely to say things like what happened in Dodge City in 2020. Dodge City, which when it was an Old West town, you had to turn your gun over to the sheriff when you arrived in town. There was big signs, everyone saying, you know, give your gun to the sheriff. You couldn't carry a gun. And they moved the only polling place to a place so far from the city that if you didn't have a car, you'd take a bus and walk a mile each way.
Wow.
And there's no question what they were doing. They were trying to get people who don't own vehicles, who tended to be Latinos in that city, to not be able to vote. And so there's going to be a huge voter suppression effort. It won't occur everywhere. There are lots of, look at the Brad Raffensperger, the Republican head of elections in Georgia. Right. He's behaved very straight. That doesn't mean Georgia didn't remove improperly a lot of people from the rolls. They did, but he ran straight elections. And we need to be vigilant about that so that we elect the people to office who the people wanted elected to office among the choices that were made available to them.
I know I'm running out of, I'm way over my David K. Johnston time, but I have one more thing I want to ask you. Can I ask one more question? Is that okay?
Ask away.
Okay, in Texas, where there's a migrant crisis at the border, they've stopped international rail traffic because so many people are trying to come in on trains. Texas is now sending the police to the border to arrest people coming into the country illegally.
Right.
So I don't know if Border Patrol is so overwhelmed that they need extra hands, or if this is going to end badly. Is this even legal? What's happening?
Well, we clearly have a very serious problem with people coming to the southern border, and we need to address that. People have rights of asylum to come here. One of the biggest things that would reduce people coming to the border, at least from Central America, would be reviving the money we were pouring into those societies. Mm-hmm. And I've been to Honduras 3 times in this century. It is a very dangerous place to go. The 3 big American airlines that fly there, Delta, United, and American, do not allow their flight crews to leave the sanitary area of the airport. They come in, they unload, they reload, they leave. Mm-hmm. That's how dangerous it is. If you were faced with your 11-year-old daughter being kidnapped and turned into a prostitute, or walking to the border in Texas, Arizona, California, and New Mexico, you're probably going to think long and hard about going there and maybe actually going there. I'm not sure how the courts will deal with Texas arresting people. I would be more concerned not about the border, but about families where there are children who were born here, or maybe the wife or the husband is born here, but there's somebody in the family who isn't. And if you start removing all of these people who are in America without permission, then you're going to have a huge economic collapse among industries throughout the Midwest and in Chicago and some other cities. And Trump, says we're going to round all these people up like Stephen Miller, his minister of hate, wants to do.
That guy.
And so I'd worry about that. One of my daughters, who looks like me, unfortunately for her, about as Irish looking and Norwegian looking as you can be, she got stopped driving across Arizona when they passed their wear your papers law.
Oh, yeah.
And the state trooper who held her for close to an hour kept saying, what part of Mexico are you from? And she kept saying, She kept saying, look at me. Do I look like I'm from Mexico? And, he held her and kept saying, I know that you're an illegal from Mexico.
Whoa.
And she got to a safe place away. She called me on the cell phone and told me all about this. The laws like this will be used by the police to stop and harass people who are simply Latino. Mm-hmm. And probable cause has now been given to them. If you look Latino, we can stop you and say, where are your papers? That's not freedom. That's not America. That's a authoritarian state.
Yeah.
And gosh, I'm old enough to remember when Republicans said we want smaller government.
Mm.
No, we want a government that's so intrusive, you have to die if your pregnancy goes bad or come right to the edge of dying. And if doctors try to help you, we'll put them in prison for the rest of their lives. This is not America. This is not freedom. This is people who have no respect for liberty and freedom. And if you're one of those people, by the way, who's saying to yourself right now, oh, you want to murder babies, abortion is murder, go read your Bible. It has a prescription in it for an abortion-inducing brew to drink. It's right in the Bible, very clear. You will also read in your Bible that there's no life until you've taken a breath. This was not an issue before Phyllis Schlafly and other people found a way to, give some meaning to their lives by stirring up this issue. And, I've been there twice where my wife was in danger of dying and couldn't make the decision on what to do. So I have a very real understanding of how crucial it is in women's health that I don't think most men have, and a lot of women don't think through because their pregnancies went fine. Most pregnancies go fine, but we have the highest childbirth mortality rate in the modern world. Cuba has a lower mortality rate than we do for newborns. And as one of my daughters who immigrated to Canada over these kinds of issues likes to say, nothing comes between me and my health care but my doctor.
That's right. And that's the way it should be. And it's crazy that we would think anything otherwise. You mentioned that most pregnancies go fine. And that may be the case, but when you're pregnant, you often will start reading books about pregnancy. And you find out as you're reading how much can go wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's frightening. And the more you read, the more you're like, oh, this is a very precarious situation I find myself in. And it's true.
My mother used to say that if men had to have every even-numbered child, every family in America would have either one child or three, depending on
that would be it.
I really was. So.
Last question I wanted to ask you, and it's just because we're talking about the border, and it is, yesterday we were talking about immigration and today as well, and I see in the chat often that people will say, President Biden is failing to secure our borders, he's failing on immigration, and I was watching an interview, I think it was CNN, with Senator Lindsey Graham, who was excusing the type of vile language used by Trump, saying language doesn't matter, actions matter. And President Biden hasn't secured the border, but the terrorists weren't getting through the border when Trump was in office. Has President Biden failed at the border? What else should he be doing that he's not doing? And was Trump really better at Biden than border security?
First of all, don't assume terrorists didn't get through the border when Trump was here. We don't know. There could be very active terrorist cells today. We do know that Bill Clinton was very effective when he got intelligence that something bad was going to happen on Millennium Day. And he basically made the heads of the 17 intelligence agencies get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to be in the White House to brief him. And sure enough, when the guys who were going to blow up, stupid idea, the Golden Gate Bridge, or else set off bombs at the Bradley International Terminal at LAX, a border guard at Blaine, Washington, said, I don't like these guys, and pulled him over, and we found their bomb-making plans in the trunk of their car. Trump wouldn't know how to do things like that, and he doesn't know how to run things. I think that the circumstances at the border have changed, and Biden has not responded well to this. He's been very focused on the economy, on keeping Ukraine from becoming a vassal of the Kremlin, which would mean endless wars through your life, probably your children's lives in Europe, and on the situation that Hamas started on October 7th. But we need to pay attention to what's going on at the border. The numbers of people that are coming are simply larger than we can reasonably process. We also have to respect the treaties that we've signed. A treaty under our Constitution is the law of the land. It's the same as if the Senate and the House passed a bill and the president signed it. It is the law, and we must obey that law. And asylum seekers have a right to come here. And of course, a lot of people legitimately have a claim of asylum, and a lot of people don't. And we can change our definition of what's a legitimate claim of asylum. So if everybody in the world who has a legitimate claim of asylum were to hit the border, we would be, in fact, overwhelmed because there's so much bad stuff out there in the world. So there's a legitimate point of criticism, and the Biden administration needs to act decisively to address doing this. And one of the best ways to address this, and easiest ways, is to go back to pouring money into Central America. Little known fact, I've written about a DC report, and since then it's been picked up by the CBS Evening News a couple of weeks ago. If you paid a nickel more for every cup of coffee at Dunkin' or Starbucks, if you paid a nickel to a dime more for every candy bar from Mars and Nestle, and if all that money went to the farmers who grow cocoa beans and chocolate beans, we wouldn't be using 1.5 million enslaved children, not technically enslaved in that they're not owned, but practically enslaved children to harvest these crops. You'd be able to pay adults to do the harvesting. The adults could then feed their families, and you wouldn't have this pressure and the rise of gangs to come north. A nickel, a dime, really? The average cup of coffee when I wrote about it at Starbucks cost, as I recall, just about $4. It's in the DC report piece, so somebody can look it up and see. And a nickel is an insignificant amount of money. It's like the old Warren Beatty remake of Mr. Jordan, where the guy is taken up to heaven and then given a chance to come back. And he says, you mean the cost of not killing all the porpoises and dolphins to get the tuna is a penny a can? A penny a can more for tuna? Let's do this. And so, better foreign policy will help with this. It was the Trump administration that cut off a lot of the money to Central America because the Minister of Hate, Steve Miller, doesn't want black and brown people, mostly in Central America, brown people, getting any money. And one other point about that, Kim, all this money we're spending to keep Ukraine free, it's like all of our foreign aid program, it's spent here. When we provide foreign aid food to another country, you buy American crops and we pay to ship them there. When you provide computers to a government so it can have a more efficient running government, and sometimes, unfortunately, a more authoritarian government, those are IBM and Apple and other American company computers. They're not Chinese computers or German computers. And we need to recognize that when the Republicans say we're not going to give money for Ukraine and the war in Israel, and we're certainly not going to give money to Central America, they're really saying we don't want taxpayer money spent to create and sustain jobs here in America.
Yeah. It's
an anti-worker policy. Unfortunately, that's not how our news media overall covers it. But that's the reality. 90% of the aid to Ukraine is spent paying American workers and suppliers.
That's interesting. And it's not an angle that you hear very often. Thank you for bringing it. I could keep you on this show for the whole 2 hours and never, ever run out of questions to ask and things to learn. David K. Johnston, a pleasure having you on. Will I get you the day after Christmas on the 26th?
Yeah.
All right.
We'll back a week from today. Take care.
I'll see you then. Bye. Bye-bye. David K. Johnston, everybody. Yes.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.